I know many copywriters want to be writing sales copy and marketing materials, but there is value in writing obscure and unusual reports for senior level executives. I'll share one of those such reports, and that is the status report. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and if you're in the marketing world and you have a small agency, there is a niche that you can get into that is highly valuable. And this works both if you're running your own independent agency or you're an employee providing strategic communications within a business. Now, when senior level executives get asked the status of something by a board of directors, by a regulator, by a congressional meeting, they must have not only accurate information, but they must have timely and focused materials that they can sometimes literally read from. Now, an executive covers a lot of ground in the course of a day, and they don't have the time or the resources to be aware of every detail of programs and projects within their organization. However, the laws in the United States makes them legally responsible for these activities, and in many cases, they can go to jail for activities that happen in the organization. Now, this is a strategic writing assignment that is a specialty market that goes beyond copywriting. You're both selling the value of the organization and the executive, as well as helping them have accurate information so that they can make good decisions. At the program level side, sometimes it's research that's necessary. Sometimes it's summarizing project reports and understanding how the project is moving forward. And often it is boring compiling of information. Yet, it's highly paid because when you are at the program level and you've got a $2 billion program, or you've got an executive in charge of a $100 million or $7 billion company, they need to have those communications accurate. You will also feed the marketing side with public relations notices, especially when you have to sanitize the results of a legal finding or you have to sanitize the results of a regulatory engagement, as well as some of the marketing side because you're going to extract key values from the organization. Let me give you one example. Let's say an executive has a consent order on their organization. So the Federal Trade Commission, some kind of regulatory agency has placed a legal consent order on an organization. Now that's public information. So as this strategic communications consultant, and there's many titles you can use here, but it's not an administrative role because you can research the characteristics of the consent order to write an opinion paper. You can write statements for the executive as well as briefings for the executive. And then once the remediation work starts, you can write both statements for the executive to provide to the regulatory agency, as well as verify and organize those status reports. Now, it's a writing assignment that it can include 5 to 10 individuals, and that's why often some strategic communications firms are hired or some kind of internal group is hired. Now, what's interesting about this opportunity as a copywriter or a communications consultant is that you can approach a client in a variety of ways. You can do it as an independent, through an agency, through an accounting firm, or through internal to the company, and get these types of assignments to support executive communications. You can also approach it through a regulatory agency or an accounting firm like KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or any of these larger accounting firms where they bring on subcontractors to write these reports. Now, they have their MBA present them, but ultimately the report of findings you'll write, the research papers you'll write, and then a lot of the interpretation you'll write. Now, if you have a background in technology, chemistry, engineering, laws, rules, and regulations, you're going to have extra value that you can deliver because you can understand the details of what's being done. So, for example, a project says, oh, yeah, we're going to be on time. It's 100 more man hours to get this work done, and it's this type of work. You can say, oh, wait a second, this type of work doesn't take 100 more hours, you can ask the questions and you can go into details so that the report is accurate and the executive can make a decision. Now, I've worked on a $2 billion program for the French E-2C aircraft, the U.S. Navy, the French Navy, and I've worked on other related projects in that area of that particular aircraft, and I worked in the program office. And so what we would do is I was actually a technical services guy, but I could provide written communications. So one of the things that I wrote was technical manuals for executives to use the encrypted equipment that we provided them. And sometimes it could be as easy as a checklist. It could be, or it could be a full technical manual that conveys the methodology that we're using across the 220 executives that were out there on this particular project. We had quarterly project status conferences where we would create slide decks, handouts, and other materials that were required for the communications of the current status of the program. Now, this program went on to support the Egyptian military, the Taiwanese military, various countries. So I had to work with the administrative team, which would sub out translators for some of the materials. Now, we subbed out on this public relations companies because every time we had a success with the program, we would provide our clients with press releases so that they could go back and promote the success that we had. And anytime that we had a failure or we had something that was behind, we often wrote memos to either congressional individuals, military commanders, or other people that need to be notified of the status. Now, when you're sending a status for a $2 billion program, and there's a simulator has failed to properly simulate the new changes in the system, and you've got to notify a commander in a foreign military that this is happening, there's a lot of people who want to be involved in that. And the more people you get involved in the decision making around how the document should be written, the more people who want to cover their ass and say basically, spin the story. So as someone who coordinated that project and supported the administrative team and the editorial team, we actually had to go through and make sure the language was applicable to the individual audience members, but also was factual and accurate, because that other person was making a decision about millions of dollars of funding, whether they're going to continue funding or they were not going to continue funding. Now, this is an interesting place to be because it goes beyond writing the sales letter. Sometimes you have to write for persuasion, but heavily support it with facts. Now, in an executive communications or an executive summary, those facts are in appendices. You need to know what facts are going to convince them to keep the project going, but you also have to be fair to cut the projects that are not necessary. So I delivered this one report to an individual in leadership at the command office, and I said, well, my recommendation and the recommendation of the engineers on this team is that we cut our losses and move on to another provider. And I'm summarizing it here. He picks up the phone immediately and cuts $2 million in funding and fires off 36 people immediately. It's like there was no, I gave him the paper. He asked for a summary. He read the paper and then made a phone call. Done. Off their plate. Now, there's a reason this person was making $500,000 a year. There's a reason this person had the responsibilities in a $2 billion program. But ultimately, if we had swayed things one way or another by not following a formula, then there would have been liability there, because when you cancel a contract, they have the right, in a federal contract, they have the right to challenge the cancellation. And if we couldn't evidence the facts that we delivered in this one-page memo, then we would have been in trouble, not the person who made the quick and prompt response based on the report we provided. Now, again, this is a massive opportunity that's very untapped because it takes a certain type of skill that goes beyond writing a pitch for soap. Where you're making decisions, evidencing facts, validating details, and making sure that your documents are accurate, and sometimes a very short turnaround. But again, it's a highly lucrative market that takes copywriting skills, communication skills, and public relations skills to not only find the opportunity in the organization, but to deliver accurate and clear decision-making tools. Now, if you're already writing research papers, if you're writing opinions on legal or regulatory changes, then this is right up your alley. It's very easy to do this type of work when you have those skills. But ultimately, a lot of folks don't know this work exists. I'll give you one more example when we're talking about the status report side. The status reports over time are great resources for the business development professional because you can see the successes, you extract those successes, you write up case studies. So maybe you're not writing the executive report, but getting access to those executive reports or those the results of legal findings can get you on the public relations side where you're talking about all the successes the company's had. You're building out case studies to be used in sales presentations. You're extracting the legal and correct and accurate things that salespeople can say. Because in bigger companies, you can't just send salespeople out in the field to say anything they want. Very often, you're going to have a briefing for the salespeople. So don't discount this concept or this niche as a far reach away from sales communications. Because very often, it is the necessary fodder and research materials that feed your marketing communications. Now, it's exciting to see, and I've had a couple cases where a CEO is being interviewed in a congressional debate on television, and they are they're not quoting, they're saying it, you're writing it as their words, but they're using words that came out of your report. And it's just like, you made it then. Now, there are times where the executive reads your report and they're not happy, and you've got to go back and you've got to demonstrate the facts because that CEO may at times not like what they found. And it may require them to make tough decisions. We've written reports that were not welcome in many ways because they were very open in nature and strategically focused in a direction that the executives didn't want to go. So we actually had on the team economists who were looking at the financial side. I was managing the document, and this is a good skill to have, by the way. When you have an agency, you've got to manage the document flow and the editing cycles. I was actually managing the document flow and the editing cycles, and then subject matter experts were providing feedback for their particular areas. And then once the report was done and we passed it over to the client, they weren't happy with it. And it's not that they weren't happy with the format. It's not that they weren't happy with what we had to, they were unhappy with what we had to say, but they realized that because the document is so clear and easy to understand, they realized they're in a heap of crap and they need to solve very specific problems. And we actually documented the problems that they needed to solve, and several of the 5 problems they had not known existed to that point. Now, that meant managers got fired because we found that the managers were hiding these problems and they were of a significant nature that we needed to outline it. But again, it's a strategic communications, and there's criteria we need to handle there. But if you have access to one of those documents after they've solved those problems, now you've got a perfect case study. The original document describes the problem, the root cause of the problem, and potential approaches. After time has passed and they've solved this problem, you now have a document that describes the solution and the results of the solution. Put the two together, and you've got an awesome case study for the marketplace for an organization that's trying to recover their reputation after a major mistake. And I'd love to chat with you about the value of these strategic communications. There are people who spin the big problems into great success stories. And often for every success story you do see in the news or the media, you're going to find that there are hundreds of mistakes that didn't get resolved. Now, companies tend to be embarrassed about these topics. You will have to talk frankly with an executive. Some companies don't want this type of communications floating around. So you'll write documents in a way that telegraph certain things, and then you'll discuss verbally the details. But nowhere will the actual details be written down. So you can go that far into the strategic side, or simply the executive says, hey, look, here's the problem we had, and here's how we solved it. Write a case study so that we can let the marketplace know that we don't have this problem anymore. It's really exciting. And so if you have any questions about this concept of strategic communications and the opportunity that's there, especially for high-income professionals who have subject matter expertise, but they're not finding enough copywriting assignments to be writing sales materials for companies in the same industry. This is a powerful way to reach in, because in some cases, senior level executives hire these people individually. And I'll leave you with one thing, but the key thing is, if you have questions, you can visit www.adbriefings.co.uk. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefings Copywriting Tips. Let me leave you with this one thing. If you simply made a list of senior level executives who have been indicted or have otherwise shown up in the news media in a negative way, and you want to write specifically for them doing strategic communications, there's even an opportunity there. So again, long-form sales letters, lead generation pieces, newsletters, that's not the only thing you can write. And if you're willing to have an open mind about these other opportunities, you can unlock 6 figures plus writing factual, clear, and easy to understand short reports, statuses, and white papers. The opportunity continues. As long as there are governments with regulatory bodies and there are businesses that are trying to get stuff done, there's an opportunity here. So I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefings Copywriting Tips. Visit us at the website www.adbriefings.co.uk. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. And remember, not all of our podcasts are in the archive at the website. It is kind of a scavenger hunt on purpose, because these are insights you will not hear anywhere else. The people that I worked with, they don't even know how to market themselves. Now, they're great writing these reports and they're great doing the analysis, but they need somebody like you that understands copywriting, understands the value of strategic communications, and can get these documents done. Thanks for listening.